All right, welcome to today's episode of Better Yet, Fireside Chats with innovators, visionaries, and leaders in last mile parcel delivery. I couldn't be more excited about our two guests here today. Craig Fuller, the pioneering founder and CEO of Freightwaves, and the always forward-looking co-founder and CEO of Better Trucks, Andy Whiting. Gentlemen, welcome.
Dan, thanks for having us.
Awesome. Before I hand it over to both of you to kick things off, let's talk about what we're going to do today. So using the framework of now, near, and next, we're going to unpack some of the driving forces behind today's market and those forces. We're going to talk about the transformative power of technology and alliances happening in logistics and last mile. And then we're going to wrap things up with next. So some of the exciting possibilities of what's yet to come in logistics and last mile. So we got a lot to go through. Craig, if you wouldn't mind, kick us off. Just tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us a little background.
Yeah, I'm the founder and CEO of Freightwaves. We're a data and media company that provides information analytics about global supply chains.
Awesome. And I'm Andy Whiting, co-founder and CEO of Better Trucks, last mile delivery company, really focused on residential e-com delivery, primarily in the Midwest, Texas, and in the New York area.
Awesome. So let's dive in. We're about to head into Q2. It's one of the most critical quarters in shipping and logistics as retailers work with carriers to lock in peak strategies. So Craig, I'm going to start with you. What are some of the biggest market factors or driving forces that you're seeing that are impacting some of those discussions between shippers and retailers and e-com firms, and on the other side of the business, logistics firms and carriers?
Well, I think everyone's right now trying to figure out how much longer this downturn is going to last. And so really, whether you're shippers, you're trying to understand, well, how much longer am I going to have plenty availability of capacity? Is this going to be a whole 2024 story, or do I need to plan on contingencies of potentially having a disrupted network? And that's really what everyone is sort of focused on right now, is just how long is the softness in the market and the readily available capacity going to last?
Do you have an answer?
I think we're probably looking at the second half heating up, compressing some of that available capacity. We're seeing a lot of carriers burn out of the market and leave the market. And that ultimately is going to create some pressure on capacity. And I think shippers should frankly play defense. They've enjoyed perhaps, last year was a pretty easy year compared to where we were the prior to. I think they need to be thinking about being on defense this time and just preparing their networks for any contingencies that may come their way.
Absolutely. So Andy, knowing that maybe the second half is going to be very different from the first half, how do you kind of anticipate that on your end, or as you have conversations with some of the largest retailers in the nation and the world, how do you anticipate maybe some of those shifts in these conversations today?
Yeah, so to echo what Craig said, I mean, we're seeing a lot of the same things in the market, whether that's conversations with existing customers or future customers or potential customers. Everyone's trying to make sense of it. I think there's a lot of kind of licking their wounds, kind of coming out of peak last year. Peak was not as high of a peak as we have seen in the past. It was more of a steady state uplift in the Q4. But this is the time when everyone is trying. This is the time of year when everyone is trying to, determine who are their partners going into the peak season, and whether that is, do they need to make shuffling or changes to their structure, or did what worked last year will it continue to work? And as Craig said, I think this is the time of year that people are trying to kind of put that together and become defensive about it. I think the most important thing, and you touched on this a little bit, is just the this year, as these carriers are kind of falling out of the market and the market is softer, it's more about people and partnerships than ever before. So it's not just technology, it's not just capacity, it's real strategic partnerships, and whether that's from your customer to the shipper, from the shipper to the carrier, but also other 3PLs and other logistics providers in the network. I mean, I see a lot of companies, a lot of our customers are evaluating all of their service providers, which ones work well together, which ones do not. So it's not just a technology thing. It's also the real people and partnerships that drive a lot of this.
Absolutely. So you both mentioned kind of carriers falling out of the market. The multi-carrier movement has been well underway for the last, 7 to 10 years. Are you seeing some shifts in that? Are shippers rethinking the multi-carrier movement and the diversification of risk, Craig?
Well, I think ultimately, when you say multi-carrier, there's it sort of goes back to the conversation that a lot of folks are having about what is the status of a core carrier. If you think about this, these things move in trends, and every decade to 2 decades, we see a shift in how shippers think about their routing guides and think about how they're tendering freight. And I think we're in a whole new generation. I think the tools that are available today, not just the technology that's driving it, but also the resources and the diversity of solutions that have been built over the past couple of decades, have enabled shippers to have far more control over their freight than they've ever had before. And I think what we're seeing now is this movement towards shippers, because they are ultimately in far greater control of their business and their operations, have a lot more choices available to them. And I think that's where we're seeing is they sort of are benefiting from a lot of the investments that have been made and looking at alternatives, and not, when we talk parcel specifically, the movement is to move beyond the major parcel carriers and move to finding carriers that can handle very specific types of projects at very specific cost points, that are benefiting from greater use of technology than perhaps the larger funds are, particularly in the mid-market. The largest shippers have always been had access to the top executives at UPS, FedEx. But it's those mid-market shippers that often are left out of those conversations. Their packages are oftentimes bumped or capacity bumped because a very large shipper is demanding that they get available capacity. And I think that's where now because of all the investments that have been made, is companies have plenty more options than they've ever had. And I think that's where we're seeing them think differently about how they're routing freight today than they did even 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on that a little bit. I mean, what we're seeing is, we're benefiting from that trend, right? So it used to be the largest shippers have always had the ability, the teams, the resources in place to kind of cherry pick what is best in, with multiple carriers. But the middle market and the small market companies were unable to do that. Whether it was a resource constraint, they didn't have the technology, they didn't have the necessary tools in place. And now, as those investments have been made over the logistics industry over the past dozen years, it makes it easier and easier. And what we have seen in our business is customers are seeking alternatives. They want to have an alternative, but they do want it to be similar and very like what they expect. So or what they expect from UPS or FedEx. And so for our business, building a network that can deliver packages and parcels at the speed and the same service levels and quality as you would expect from a national carrier is very important for us. And more specifically focused on kind of the as Craig mentioned, kind of, but still playing in a niche, whether that's a geographic niche, a distance niche, speed. That's still very helpful as people evaluate their partners in this year.
I mean, Dan, I think it's a really exciting time in logistics, because we've benefited greatly from what happened during COVID, is that there's now mass market awareness of supply chains and the fragility of supply chains. There's investment. The elevation of professionals in running supply chains has never been greater. They've been able to secure budgets. They've been able to get promotions. They've been able to get resources that they never had available to them because, frankly, they were often forgotten about. I mean, I know I talked to a lot of folks that ran large supply chains. These are some major Fortune 100 companies, and the CEOs didn't even know the head of supply chain's name, had zero interaction with them. And what we've seen in a post-COVID environment is those very folks are now getting elevated, are doing regular checks in with the C-suite and the board level. And that is what's creating these opportunities for them to think differently about their business. And I think because of that, we're going to see this really interesting explosion of optionality, of an investment in resiliency, but at the same time, taking advantage of a lot of the cost savings that are available with some of these more dynamic solutions.
Yeah, let's talk about that real quick. You mentioned, Craig, like the cost savings. I think what's so interesting in the market is still, like, Andy, you've talked about your asset light model, and due to that, your economics are lower. And so you are offering, the greater value versus maybe some of the nationals, but there's still a lot of hurdles, right? There's a lot of logistical hurdles. Or Andy, we see often technical hurdles. It'll be interesting. You've talked about how you'll get the verbal, you'll say everything makes sense, but we have to line up these technical resources. And that's 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, even though the economics all the way up to the board level make sense to move forward. It's like, how do we as an industry overcome that? Some of those challenges.
Well, I think so I think what Craig mentioned was now that it's kind of getting to that C-suite or board level type of a discussion, that is how you get large corporations to move faster, right? It used to be, kind of a bunch of people jockeying for budget, but especially now this year, everyone is trying to tighten their belts. The whole economy is trying to tighten their belt. And, so if you're coming to, your leadership team and saying, I have a way of saving money, we just need to make this, investment in time and technology, it's a much easier buy. And they also saw, as Craig mentioned, about the resiliency necessary over the past few years, or if they lacked it, or if they did have it, they saw the value of that. And I think that's where, it has elevated to the point where it's not just the, kind of the redheaded stepchild of the organization. It's it's just as important as, as the buyers and everybody else in the entire organization.
Yeah, last year was a year of resiliency. I think everyone is suffered from such great whiplash that took place in 2021 that they were still recovering from that last year, and they were reluctant to make many changes in their operation because of it. They just wanted stability. And I think this year is the year where we'll start to see a lot of companies rethink about their supply chains, rethink about how they're routing freight, and look for some of these solutions that have been able to build up sufficient scale to actually solve problems.
Awesome. One more offshoot I want to dig into in the technology is the data piece. So I know, Craig, with Freightwaves, it's a key component of your offering. You can't go 5 minutes these days without reading or talking or having someone bring up the term data. But Craig, how are you seeing shippers and retailers materially change the way that they operate, leveraging the data that they have? Or what's new this year that you're seeing in 2024, maybe that you anticipated seeing previously?
I would say it's more of an evolutionary sort of step. I don't, there's been so much talked about in AI, and 3 years ago or 4 years ago is blockchain. And so ultimately it's a continuation and an evolution of using data and information to inform how your operations are ran. But there's never been more data, but there's also never been more noise that's out there. And I think what we're seeing now is that the investments and the attention is now at the C-suite. They now are aware that they have significant challenges in their supply chain. They're rethinking about things like nearshoring and rethinking about how products are sourced. There's a lot more attention on the physical elements of what's happened across their supply chain and how they're thinking about how to prepare for whether it's just any type of disruption that could take place, but also how do they manage cost? And that is where the data really makes sense. And they can apply that into making decisions. And there's been a lot of new technologies that are centered on, I hate the word AI because it to so many people, to the common people, it feels like it's new. It's just machine learning that's taking in itself an evolution. Like it's essentially using algorithms to make decisions and become smarter over time. And ultimately, data has always been a part of that equation. But now they're getting real budgets and investments, and that's helping companies think differently about how they're routing things. Digital twins is a term that's popping up as well. They're able to simulate these activities. So what happens if I reroute my freight through another carrier? What happens if I move it through a different distribution center? They're able to actually simulate those things, and this is, I think, is what is going to drive a lot of innovation for the next couple of years. There's been a mistake that I think has happened in supply chain and supply chain technology is venture capitalists discovered this industry in 2015. And they drove so much investment into the industry and not always after the best business models. And a lot of that money has gone wasted, but that's not a bad thing. Because what we've benefited from that is a lot of investments in technology, and even the incumbents have been forced to respond to that. And so now there's so much available software and intelligence and services that is creating so many different ways that we can solve problems that we've never been able to solve before.
I think the other value of kind of that shift since 2015 is also just general engineering talent kind of also going into the space, right? So not just money flowing in, but also kind of perhaps people that were uh, interested in freight, but also the ability to kind of exercise their creativity on the engineering side and have the freedom to build some really cool stuff. So I think that's very valuable. You mentioned on the software side of things and the intelligence for the data. I think one thing that we often kind of I've seen from our customers is they leave out this concept of cleanliness of their data, right? Or kind of preparing their data to be leveraged. So I think that's something that if I'm a enterprise or a executive at a large retailer or at a company, like putting money into that piece of it, which is making sure my data can be leveraged, is very valuable. That's not what we do, but we benefit from that greatly when companies come to us with clean data about their kind of what their challenges are. It's important too.
Awesome. So let's keep moving. I want to switch topics just a little bit. I want to talk about partnerships and ecosystems and alliances. I think now more than ever, we've seen that you don't go it alone. So as carriers or 3PLs or logistics firms, Craig, how are you seeing alliances in the industry either evolve or shift as some of this technology has taken hold, as things are getting complicated, as networks have grown?
Yeah, I love the word partnership because it gets used so often in this industry, and it's usually by the ones that are not like this. The thing about freight is it's a pendulum between ultimately it's either a shipper's market, a carrier's market. And the carriers are screaming about partnership right now because they have so much capacity that they're really wanting the shippers to be partners with them. And it was the other way around. When the shippers needed capacity, they were looking, we want a partner. I think what really matters at the end of the day is, are the providers able to deliver what they promised to their shipper community? And that's ultimately, I mean, shippers are paying for a service at the end of the day, and they want value from that. And I think ultimately it's always been about that. And that's the most fundamental role in freight is at the end of the day, what shippers are paying for is to get something from point A to point B at times that they can depend on at a price that is competitive with what they would otherwise pay. The word partnership, everyone uses it, but it's such a cliche. And frankly, it's kind of BS at the end of the day. As shippers, when they have the upper hand, are immediately pulling freight from carriers that they promised they were going to be partners. And the same thing happens on the carrier side is when they have the upper hand is they immediately decide to get rid of those shippers that they don't think they're making money on. So I've always had a problem with that term because I find it so overused when it really is not a partnership. Ultimately, what I think this industry is about is finding companies that can solve real problems with predictability and transparency, and ultimately at prices that are competitive with other players. That's ultimately what the rules of logistics are. And it's always going to be that way. But going back to what we said a few seconds ago is we've never had more solutions available to us than we do today. And I think that creates an enormous amount of optionality for shippers that they're able to enjoy, unlike any time in history.
I'll add a little bit about partnerships. As a carrier, I understand completely what you're saying. Everything you just said is like it's whoever's kind of on top in the relationship gets the kind of is the one that is or I guess is getting the the words partnership or using them a little bit more frequently. But when we think about partnerships, as a medium-sized carrier in the Midwest, in order to service these customers and deliver on our customer promise nationally, we partner with a number of other companies. One of them being GLS, which is a West Coast shipper or West Coast carrier, and that kind of partnership allows us to cover greater service area than we would without them, and go to our customers and offer again promise a higher service level than they would get otherwise. And so that type of partnership is we're only able to do that because of the technology layer that stitches it all together. And just as Craig was mentioning, those kind of that optionality for their customers is where the customers win. So that exists because of technology that did not exist, 10 years ago, and it does now. And it's because of, technology. So for our customers, it feels like one network, but the reality is it's a technology powered kind of partnership. So that's how we look at it as well.
Awesome. All right, we covered a ton of ground in the now. Let's move on to near. So, Craig, you have a pretty unique vantage point in the industry, both in kind of the relationships that you have and from a media perspective, what you cover. So there's a lot happening now in the evolution. We're talking about technology. We're talking about drones. We're talking about EVs. But even this year, the headlines in EVs have been, they were supposed to be the answer, and now they're the problem. So it still feels like maybe for every 2 steps forward, we take 1 step back. So my question to you is, what do you see as the next major milestones that need to happen in order for maybe parcel delivery or logistics to materially change due to a major technology, be it maybe drones or, EVs?
Look, drones and EVs are the sexy stuff. It's the stuff that gets everyone excited. And being in media, ultimately, if you can have something that's big and moves, and it's why the media companies love to have B-roll of trucks or drones, because they're cool stories. But the actual innovation is the boring stuff. It's RPA, it's robotic process automation. It's stuff that happens inside the warehouse. It's using data to optimize operations and route freight. Unfortunately, it's not really interesting for most people to sit there and watch computer code on a screen or somebody programming to change it. But that's where the action's happening. It's happening inside the software itself. And as Andy mentioned, it's being able to automatically route freight. The old interline carriers that 20 years ago, I'm dating myself, when I ran an LTL consolidation business, we didn't have electronic exchange with some of our interline carriers or some of our pickup and delivery companies. We had to have somebody on the phone call. Today, there are solutions through technology where this stuff can all be electronically transmitted, and you get the tracking and visibility and claims offerings through a single solution. I think that's really where a lot of the innovation, we're going to see more and more of that investment in making things faster, quicker, more dependable, more transparent, and cost less versus the EVs and the drones. Now they'll come, they're 10 years out. And I'm a media guy. We love reporting on that stuff because it drives clicks. But people don't read the articles about the innovation that's actually taking place because it's so incremental and frankly so boring. And I often say logistics and supply chain is like the utility company. You don't think about the power company until the power is out. I was driving this morning, and I live in the country in the mountains, and our roads are a lot of potholes and stuff. And the county finally filled up some of the potholes with just filled it in with black rock. And I was thinking about the innovation of roads. This is asphalt and concrete is like 150-year invention. In the old days, and probably I have to go back and research this, but the old days, it was all dirt roads. And I'm thinking how grateful we are we have roads. It's pretty remarkable, but no one cares because it's boring. But that's the same stuff that we're talking about in logistics and supply chain, is we're building asphalt roads and improving the asphalt that's inside the system. It's boring stuff, but it's actually changing the way this business works, bringing significant cost savings to consumers and making things so much more dependable than they've ever been before.
Yeah, absolutely. Andy, give me a specific, a tangible. You're on the ground floor. You're driving some of this innovation forward. What are some of those near innovations that you're focused on?
I mean, Craig said it very well. It's everyone talks about drones. What's going to happen to your business once drones come online? And we look at that as I look forward to that happening. They'll be part of our system. They'll be, I'm sure we got many drivers in our network that would, love to, operate a drone or be part of that network. I mean, for us, it's a customer experience thing. So from our perspective, like Craig mentioned, the old interline way of the LTL carriers is picking up phones, making sure that freight got from where it needed to go to where it needed to go. And that was done by hand. And now, it's still, with technology, we can do that, pretty seamlessly. And to the customer, very, it's both transparent, but also the tracking and tracing exists. And, so from that side of things, that's where the innovation happens, is the customer still wants the experience of one carrier. and ultimately, if it means drones coming online and actually executing the delivery at the end, like the customer is not going to care. They just want the same experience from the carrier. What we see is, like Craig said, in the warehouse, kind of the boring stuff, the improvements. We're a value-based shipper, right? So we go in and we definitely sell on value, whether that's price or speed or a combination of the two. And in order to do that, like, we have to have incredible technology to make sure we can do it at a very low cost inside the warehouse. So a lot of the technology we do is sortation work, improvements under the roof in order for us to service our customers better, and make sure things happen smoother. But again, yeah, no one writes headlines about that. The new sort software that we put out there is not like a headline catching thing. It's it's just but it makes our customers' lives better. And kind of what Craig was saying about the power companies, like, logistics is a very thankless job until something goes wrong. It's usually no one calls you until something is late or out of sync. And so it's I like that analogy about the power company. No one cares about them until the power's out. So I'm familiar with that.
Annie, you mentioned consumer expectations or a customer experience. How have you seen maybe those shift? I know speed has been a huge headline over the last couple of years, but also like this year, especially the last 6 months, we've seen international marketplaces take more of a prominence in the United States, and we've actually seen consumers willing to wait longer for an even lower price. Do you see customer expectations shifting this year, or how are you seeing them shift?
I mean, this is econ 101. I would say, just the supply chain, supply and demand, like, whipsaw over the past 4 years is really just straight out of the textbooks, right? It's like overcapacity, too much supply, too much capacity, whipsaw back and forth. And we were at one point, prices were high, now they're low, and what we're seeing this year is, Amazon set that bar a few years ago about 1 to 2 day delivery. People have always been wanting things faster and faster, but this year, I think people are kind of comfortable saving a few bucks to wait. Whether that's some of the Chinese, the Temu of the world, or the Sheins of the world that are fulfilling directly from China, and those are 10 to 15 day delivery times, but cheap products and cheap shipping. Or even we're in a bunch of RFPs right now with the biggest retailers in the world, and they are all asking the same thing. It's no longer the premium product of the one the next day price high priced. It is the really, what is the best value you can give us right now? I don't care if it's 3 or 4 days or 5 days even. It's like, what is the lowest price you can get? And that that's the reality right now. I think that goes back to people, not only customers themselves wanting to save money, but also retailers trying to save money as much as they can as well.
Yeah, we don't need the dopamine hits that we starved for in COVID. Because, like, I remember during COVID, it was like you would order something because there was nothing else going on, and that was the thing that could lift you up. And now we're all busy. Like, I have children, you guys have children, so, like, we have things going on. And if I order something, it's here by Friday, I'm okay with it. And I think it's because I don't need the near-term dopamine hit. And I think we're going back to the way things are. I think in some ways, the story that probably should be told about 24 is this is more of a sort of a continuation of the story that was pre-COVID. Is largely the COVID excesses, whether it's inventory excesses that we built up, or consumer expectations, or whatever it is, even inflationary issues. A lot of that stuff has been sort of put beyond us and behind us, and we're in a sort of a new back to the way things were. But there have been some pretty significant nuances in how the economy is operating. Nearshoring is probably the most exciting story right now in supply chain. It's not technology. A couple of years ago, it was all the new tech that was coming on board. Now I think it's about nearshoring and the geopolitical things that are really driving a lot of this. And I think what we're going to see is a lot of additional manufacturing and investment in services that can help drive this nearshoring element. And so less, we talk about Temu and Shein, and I want to know, when does Wish.com get its business model back. And to me, it's just a continuation of that model. But I think the more interesting thing is really what's taking place in the reindustrialization of the Americas.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting. Like you kind of look at that with some of the movements and the shifts, and you wonder, can you put the genie back in the bottle? You know, can you put the cat back in the bag? As far as I remember when Prime Now hit Chicago, and they had big billboards of we'll get it there in literally 30 minutes and 60 minutes. And somewhere in the back of your mind a few years ago, you're like, I don't really need that, but is it going to shift? And you have, to both your points, seen that. Even with Amazon, you're seeing more and more people choose the, choose your day, put everything in one box, fewer shipments, save it. And you are seeing that. So in some ways, interestingly enough, I do think we're seeing the genie go back in the bottle just a little bit, Andy, to your point, across the industry.
I think one thing, that we are in an election year. So a lot of this stuff is going to be, driven by that as well. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things as whether it's nearshoring, to Mexico or, to Canada or to, South America, or if it's, just industrialization in the Americas. All of that's going to be driven by, kind of, I think, policy changes here or potential policy changes. But either way, it makes for not very dull. There's never a dull moment in all this stuff. So
amazing, gentlemen. We covered a ton of ground. We covered now. We covered near. We're going to wrap up on this next. This podcast is called Better Yet for a reason. We believe the best is yet to come in last mile parcel delivery. So, Craig, I'll start with you. What excites you most when you think about the future of this industry?
I'm most excited at the nearshoring story. I think because it's real. It's not a technology. It's not a single company that's doing something. It's actually fundamentally shifting the quality of life back towards the Americas and reindustrializing the economy. And I think that is a really exciting time to build resiliency. I think the border crisis that has gotten so much media attention won't be solved, but can be mitigated by creating proper employment in Mexico and the Americas, and really taking a lot of the sort of shift away from Asia as the manufacturing epicenter of the world to the Americas. And that means that logistics, and particularly surface logistics that includes trucking and rail intermodal, is going to be a big growth industry over the next decade, because we're going to be less dependent upon international shipping, or at least global ocean shipping, and more on near shore shipping, which includes the Americas. And I think that's a pretty dynamic and awesome story that will play out over the next decade.
Yeah, and we are definitely tracking and very optimistic about kind of the cross-border coming from, especially from Mexico. So, I mean, there's a ton of opportunity there, and we're definitely focused on that. We see more and more customers that are kind of that medium-sized business that are leveraging, either fulfillment in Mexico or manufacturing in Mexico and bringing across the border. And it's definitely great. And then the reindustrialization is great for America too. So,
and it's real. I mean, if you look at it, we have energy, we have food, we have so many reasons why America and the Americas should be the industrial center of the global economy, is because we have all these resources here and we have fantastic geography. So go America.
Yes, I like it. Andy, should we finish up with you? Better yet, what are you most excited about aside from nearshoring, reindustrialization of America, in last mile parcel delivery?
I mean, right now we're super excited about adding more and more capacity for our customers. And when I talk about capacity, not just in our network, but also expanding our network. So, we're currently covering 45% of the U.S. households on our network. Really proud of that as a kind of a small to medium-sized carrier. That to us is very valuable to some of our big shippers, and we keep adding more and more to that. So, kind of expansion for us is awesome, and then just keeping the customer service strong is key. So, a lot of trends that Craig mentioned, we're riding the wave of those, but just continuing to build good technology to power people and partnerships. So
amazing. So very grateful to have both of you on today for your perspectives and your unique perspectives. So thank you. This is Better Yet, and we will catch you on the next episode. Appreciate it.